Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to begin to start asking you questions at the beginning of each video, something for you to be thinking about as you study this period or this topic. And so in this case, the question is, did industrialization help or harm America? And for those of you that are in science classes or environmentalism classes, this is a topic where you might find some spillover between the two different fields of study. So the Gilded Age, gilded means covered in gold, and so as if to look as if it's gold. So imagine you have a piece of plastic and you cover it with some gold plating. Is that entire thing now gold? No. And so the Gilded Age is supposed to be like the idea here. It was given this title to suggest that perhaps this wasn't all perfect as it might seem. We're industrializing, our economy's growing, this is a really good thing, or is it? And so hence the research question here. Did industrialization help or harm America? So you don't necessarily need to take notes on this particular slide, but there's a really important question behind a lot of the Gilded Age, and that is, why are poor people poor? What makes them poor? And it's important that we think about this question, because I don't think it's one that we think about a lot. And especially in school, there seems to be a parallel between poor students and academic achievement, and a lot of people assume that those two are connected. And so some things that people generally throw out when I ask this question, why are poor people poor? The first one is almost always they are lazy, and that's often an assumption. And I think when we think about our peers in school, they are lazy. Okay, well, what are we observing that makes them appear lazy? Well, they don't do their homework, or they don't do, whatever it might be. And so, okay, we're assuming that because they didn't do their homework, they are lazy. Well, what if it's that they worked a shift last night, or they were up taking care of their family, or, they had all these other obligations, which if you lived their life, you might not find that they are, in fact, lazy. But we often say they are lazy. Another thing I hear is they don't want to be selfish. Poor people don't have what it takes to sort of survive in this man-eat-man world, this type of thing. And so they pride themselves in being selfless and giving, and they give their money away, and they donate, that type of thing. And so they have some sort of inherent desire to not be selfish. They lack the skills or qualities to succeed in their culture. They don't have what it takes, basically. They might have some sort of disability. They might be rude or inappropriate and thus can't get hired in some sophisticated higher jobs, that type of thing. Poor people lack the support system and connections to be successful. This is a bit more practical support system to raise them and encourage them in school to do well, and then connections. When you graduate school, do you have a father who's a CEO of a company who's just going to get you this really nice job, or this mother who is a politician and she can get you the connections to get the good jobs. So the system and the connections, or the friends. Imagine if you were friends with Bill Gates, or any other major CEO. That would be unbelievable for your success. And so they lack this support system and connections to be successful. If you can think of others that I haven't thought of, please share those with me. So reasons that people throw out for why poor people are poor. And this is important because during the industrial era, there was a lot of talk of nature versus nurture. Charles Darwin had just come out with his theory of evolution, and people were really buying into it. And so the general mindset in the Industrial Revolution was that nature was the cause for our position in life versus nurture. So what nature v nurture refers to is it your biology that makes you behave the way you behave, or is it the way that you were raised that makes you behave the way you were behaved? Today, psychologists buy into it's both, and but we had to swing one way and the other to really get to that place. And a lot of studies show that both our nature and our nurture influence our behavior. And if you're interested in this topic, this is something we talk about in psych throughout most of the year. So nature was largely considered the causes of people's weaknesses. Intellectually, if you are stupid, it's because your parents are stupid. It's because they passed down stupid genes to you. And there is partial validity to that, but obviously one's environment, one's experiences, and other things can help you intellectually, economically. If your parents are rich, you will be rich. And there's certainly some correlation there as well, because your parents probably have access to resources and connections to other rich people that can get you a job or other things. And so there could be some validity to that, but believing that rich people, but in the industrial age and in the Gilded Age, what we're talking about is the belief that if your parents are rich, it's because they possess some inherent ability that makes them better than everybody else. And so they have succeeded economically. So if a parent is a doctor, then you will be a doctor because you probably have the same intellectual prowess as your parent. If your parent is a janitor, then you probably will be a janitor too because you are inheriting the same intellectual abilities from your parents. And that is just inaccurate. That's a fallacy that many people believed in the Industrial Revolution. And then socially as well. If you have certain social skills, then you will pass those on to your children. What all these find intellectually, economically, and socially, they find a commonality. So they find some sort of connection, or if you want to be really specific, they find a correlation. So yes, there is a correlation between the intelligence of a parent and the intelligence of their child. There is a correlation between someone's economic standing and the economic standing of their child. And there is a correlation between someone's social skills or social standing and the social skills and social standing of their child. But the biological connection there between mother and child, or father and child, is not the cause for that. That is just a piece of the puzzle. So this all leads to something that is called social Darwinism. Again, Darwin had just discovered evolution, and people, scientists, and culture in general, sort of mass media, and the mass public is really excited about Darwin's theory. And so this is a term you will probably need to know on the exam, and that is social Darwinism. So what social Darwinism is the belief that wealthy people have superior talents and genes and therefore succeed. So wealthy people have superior genes. Those talents come from their genes, and that is the reason they succeed. And people would present social Darwinism as sort of fact. Well, they just are rich, or they just are poor, and there's nothing we can do about it. No amount of nurture, no amount of care, no amount of learning or teaching or supporting or anything that we do in school will help these people get better, get richer. And this was really prevalent, and it led to a lot of people sort of ignoring the plight of the poor in the Industrial Revolution. wealthy people are wealthy, poor people are poor, and therefore, there's nothing we can do about it. And these poor people that are living on the streets, it's not the environment that's the problem. It's not, the legal system. It's not the way they were raised. It's not their lack of education. It's the fact that their parents had poor genes, and they got those poor genes, and they can't succeed as a result. So this is essentially the idea of survival of the fittest applied to economic success rather than biological success. So in the image here, you have a sort of a flow of male development, if you will, from ape to man in the first part there. You can see, this is Darwin's theory, essentially, of evolution, that we, over millions of years, moved from being ape-like to being upright, being erect, and walking like we do today, like humans. And so if you look at the second part of this image, it's basically saying that the bottom of the barrel, the place where we've evolved from, is being a criminal, to being somebody who's living on the streets, to being some sort of janitor, then perhaps a firefighter, then perhaps a business person, then perhaps a CEO making a lot of money. And so the CEO's family has evolved from this place of being poor, but they have, through superior talents, gotten better. And then, of course, if we look for women, same idea there on the left, and then the bottom of the barrel for women is being some sort of prostitute or something like that, to being some sort of housewife, to perhaps being a businesswoman. But you've really succeeded as a woman, not when you make money, no. You really succeed as a woman when you get married, and then when you have a child, you have achieved your full potential. And you can hear things that support this idea of social Darwinism a lot. When you hear people say, well, she couldn't get a man, or he didn't have what it takes to be the CEO. Those types of phrases could be signs of social Darwinism. The businesswoman there, she might be super successful, she might make a lot of money, but she's only midway up the pack for women, because she also needs to have the kindness and support and caring feminine nature to land a man. And that's sort of part of her identity sometimes in society, in a social Darwinistic view of the world. One thing that came out of this time is something called eugenics. And eugenics is a social philosophy which tried to improve human genetics through promoting the reproduction of people with desired traits. So eugenics is something that you can still hear people talking about today. So you can see the root word gene in there, eugenics, Eugene. And the idea here is that we want to improve human genetics. So we want to speed up human evolution, essentially. So what we want to do is we want to keep people that are, the cheerleader and the captain of the football team, we want them to reproduce because they obviously have achieved the highest, possible thing that they can achieve. And we want, the high school dropouts and the mentally ill and people that are in jail and others to not reproduce. So it's passing on desired traits. So if people do not have desired traits, we do not want them to exist, essentially. And so this is a pretty harsh social philosophy. You can see in the picture here, this was a poster or a campaign that was put out. Some people are born to be a burden for the rest. So what they did is they sexually sterilized a lot of people without their will. And obviously this eventually became illegal to do. But when you sterilize somebody, it essentially keeps them from being able to reproduce and have children. So people were sexually sterilized as a result of eugenics. Others were sent to institutions to be treated. This is where people like Dorothea Dix and others stepped in. Many people died in these institutions where they were being treated. So the institutions were essentially prisons for mentally ill people that we didn't know how to deal with, or science hadn't evolved to understand that they are behaving the way they are because of some sort of treatable illness. So eugenics is kind of the dark side of this theory, although of course we do hear this social philosophy a lot in society, like, oh, they should not have children, or oh, they should, I hope they have kids, they're so cute, blah blah blah. Those ideas are essentially the philosophy behind what became sort of a dark program of eugenics, where people are being denied the right to have children. And so, yeah, again, and now this is considered a violation of human rights. Another thing that came out of this time is a study called craniometry. And craniometry is an early study of human intelligence. It is a pseudoscience, so pseudo meaning false science, that wrongly thought that the size of one's brain or one's skull improved your intellectual capabilities. So here this guy is having his skull measured to determine how smart he is, where he ranks intellectually. This study propagated, meaning supported and pushed forward racism, and it also attempted to justify racism. So this is a time, just following Reconstruction, and people are saying, well, black people are inferior to white people because they have smaller brains, and that's just the way it is. Their skulls are smaller, and women, of course, are not in college and other things, and women are allowed to get to vote because women have smaller brains, and that's just the way it is. And obviously, later science found that, yes, women do have smaller brains because women have smaller heads than the average men. But they also found that women's brains are actually more compact. There are more, essentially flaps and layers of skin that are, crammed in there. But they actually have the same amount. And that was a really interesting discovery. And so, and obviously science today has found that women do not have any intellectual, anything that prevents them intellectually from achieving, and also black people. They also, when they looked back at the studies of black people, they found that the majority of the skulls they used to measure black intelligence were black female skulls. And so they were comparing mostly black female skulls to white male skulls. And so, of course, they found that the black females had smaller skulls. This is obviously a fallacy. The size of your brain has nothing to do with your intelligence, but people thought it did. And so we had something called craniometry. We also began a period of intelligence ranking. The IQ test came over from a man named Binet in France. He created the IQ test. And the purpose of the IQ test initially was simply to determine if there were people that had mental challenges. IQ tests are usually taken in elementary school. And the purpose is to pinpoint anybody that might need special education. So the intelligence quota exam is a later evolution of craniometry, and it's the idea that one group is more intelligent, still persists, and we have sort of an obsession with ranking people intellectually. And this is an interesting question of whether or not we should do that, and certainly there are educators that feel strongly on both sides. So the Gilded Age. Gilded means covered in gold. So fake, it appears good, but there's a lot going on underneath that, as I explained at the outset. The Gilded Age saw extreme wealth for some, as you can see in this picture. Here is this man, towering over the Capitol building, and the law and Uncle Sam don't really have any ability to do anything to stop this. The middle class grew a little bit during this time. There was a need essentially for middle management to develop, because we started to have big organizations like corporations and others that were huge, and so you had to have somebody in the middle communicating to the boss. The working class lived in poverty, and the majority of Americans were living in the working class. So there are three major causes of the revolution. And so revolution is dramatic change right away. And this is definitely a revolution in terms of our economy. Whether it's a revolution in terms of our social situation, that's another question. So major inventions during this time improve our ability to produce. So things like the light bulb, things like steel, things like railroads improving, other things like that. These types of things happen during this time. We have a lot of inventions, and they improve productivity. One of the reasons that we're able to have all these inventions is because of an evolution in economics, actually, because we allowed patents. And this is kind of a mind-blowing thing, but we can pretty much mark the beginning of economic prosperity with the development of patents. We can see certain types of economies in world history that are extremely successful because that nation develops a system for patents. And patents, remember, are basically just the rights to the production of something. And basically it's giving you credit. You get financial credit every time somebody uses your work, uses your product, or builds something like your product that you invented. We saw this with Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, and sort of creating a revolution in the South. And the Industrial Revolution is essentially those major inventions, but tons of them that influence our ability to industrialize. And so these inventions are super important, but the development of patents, basically the government is saying when you enforce patents, when you say we want to have patents, we want to allow people to be creative, you're essentially endorsing creativity, and you're giving incentive to invent. And so people, if you invent things, you will be reimbursed. You will be paid for that. You will be set for life if you can invent something really, really cool. And so patents are super important for economic success because who knows who the person is who's going to have the idea for something. But if they have the idea and then are able to get some sort of patent for that idea, and spread the word about this idea, that might lead to an economic revolution. So major inventions improve the productivity, and this gets into something called macroeconomics. In economics, we can essentially divide the study of economics into three parts. One is personal finance, how you and your family spends your money. Microeconomics is basically business theory and how businesses should spend their money. So anybody who's taken like intro to business, that's essentially what that class is microeconomics, what businesses should do. And then the last one is macroeconomics. And macroeconomics is essentially what all politicians need to know. And it's what is the role of the government in economics, and big picture, zoom out how businesses and entire industries work and relate, and the theories behind predictions about what might happen if something happens. So in macroeconomic theory, in sort of big picture, when technology improves, what we are able to supply usually increases. So by having a faster railroad, for example, we're able to ship goods and services places faster. Therefore, we are able to supply more goods and services. When we invented the light bulb, for example, this seems really cool. Yay, we can like stay up all night and party. No, what's really important about the light bulb is the light bulb allowed people to work in past dark. It used to be that you would stop work when it became dark, and so now with this new technology, we're able to supply more goods and services. So production in this case becomes faster and more efficient, and that's essentially what one of the causes that caused the Industrial Revolution. Production also becomes cheaper, and so the cheapness of this helps the economy to boom. The second cause of the Industrial Revolution is government economic policy. And so one of those things is patents, but the other is laissez-faire. And laissez-faire is French. Laissez-faire is French for let it be. Let it be, meaning leave it alone. Laissez-faire, leave it alone. So laissez-faire is a system of of government policy, essentially, in economics, which is basically leave the economy alone. It's a very conservative Republican position to have. And in the Industrial Revolution, that was essentially the position that the government took. We are not going to get involved in economics. The economy is booming. This is a good thing. So we are just going to let it be. We're not going to do anything. So what this meant was that there was no government regulation in business. Laissez-faire economics is pure capitalism. So there's no government involvement. The government does not regulate anything. And so examples of government regulation, a regulation is where you regulate something, where you step in and you suggest or you enforce certain things. So examples of government regulation could be minimum wage. You have to pay your employees this amount. Okay, that's the government telling businesses what to do. That's a regulation. So minimum wage could be an example. Anytime the government makes a rule about waste, so like if a company puts too much pollution into the air, that's an example when the government steps in and says you cannot produce more than this amount, or you'll be fined for polluting the environment. That's a government regulation. So those types of things are what are examples of when the government steps in. We're going to learn about a lot of government regulations that follow the Industrial Revolution, things that you might take for granted today that didn't exist then. So one of those, I'll give you a heads up right now, one of those is the minimum wage. There was no minimum wage during the Industrial Revolution, so people needed work, didn't have anywhere else to go. All the bosses in town paid them $1 a day or $1 a week, and so these people would just do it because they didn't have a choice. The third cause of the revolution, so we have the first being technology improving, the second being the government not really stepping in, so we have this big boom, which is really important. And the third cause is immigration. So mass immigration causes the labor pool to increase. So we have all this technology, and now we have tons of people to work for us. 28 million immigrants arrived during the Industrial Revolution. So this is like 1860 to 1900. 28 million immigrants. It's hard to believe. Most of them coming from Europe and Eastern Europe. So, some examples of technology. The telephone is invented. This is a really big deal. Now we can pick up the phone. We can actually talk to each other instead of sending telegraphs. The incandescent light bulb. So I've already given you a heads up on that one. The light bulb's invented, allowing people to work longer hours. The typewriter is invented, and this is a big deal for women because typewriting was seen as women's work, and so it gave opportunities for women in the workplace. The typewriter made it more efficient to print things, to write things. Obviously, now we don't have to use a printing press. We can actually just type it out, or instead of writing letters, we can now type them, and it's much faster. So the typewriter is invented, and the typewriter actually persists as the major form of written communication through most of your parents' college educations. I know my mom used to write papers on a typewriter in college, so like 30-page papers on a typewriter, where if you mess up one letter, you have to redo the whole page. Refrigeration is invented. This is a really big deal because now we are able to ship meat from the frontier to and from sort of the Midwest, where a lot of the cattle is raised in our country. We're able to now ship meat all across the world. So refrigeration is really fascinating because you can see the rise of the meat industry as a result of refrigeration. Textiles. The picture to the right is a picture of a textile. These boys are working essentially the machines that textile machines create cloth. And so these guys are working that. Manchester, New Hampshire was a major textile manufacturing area. And so when you drive through Manchester, you see all the big brick buildings on either side of the river. And those are, former textile mills. So another really important one was the invention of steam power. This replaced animal and manpower. Okay, so now we can we start to see different types of vehicles on roads and automotives. So this is sort of the pre-gasoline motor. The steam-powered engine is there, so a lot of cars, early cars, had steam-powered engines and got rid of horses and other things. These types of engines were easier to manage, a little bit stronger, that type of thing. The Bessemer Process. Bessemer is the last name of Henry Bessemer. He invented a new way of converting iron to steel using steam. We used to produce 5 tons of steel a day using the older method. And with the Bessemer process, we could now create 5 tons of steel in 15 minutes. Steel is far superior to iron. It's much stronger. Iron was weaker. Iron was used in the building of really tall buildings. Iron was used on railroad trains, etc. But iron was not as strong, and so having steel really helped us to industrialize because we were able to build skyscrapers, these huge buildings. And the reason we were able to do that is because steel isn't gonna break. And so you can just see 5 tons in a day versus 5 tons in 15 minutes. You are dramatically improving the production of steel with the Bessemer process. Steel improved the rails, and as a result, railroads improve. This picture is a little bit of foreshadowing. Iron rails to steel. The size of the track is standardized during the Civil War. Tracks double. Basically, the government funds the production of tons of more tracks, especially in the North, just because this improvement of railroads begins during the Civil War, and so obviously the improvement will originate in the North. Coal replaces wood fuel. Coal replaces wood fuel, and this is a really good thing. Coal burns much more efficiently, and so we have a lot of miners that are digging out coal in our country, and that becomes a growing industry. And so if you worked on a train, one thing you might find yourself doing is getting covered in soot because your job is to shovel coal into the engine to keep it going. Better production, access travel, and speed. Improving the railroads was a huge deal because we're able to access raw materials. We're able to travel further to visit families. You can begin to see families spreading out. It used to be that families would settle in an area, and then mom, dad, and all of their children would live within a mile of each other, and now families start to spread out because of the accessibility of railroads and the ability to travel back and forth. And then railroads obviously improved the speed of production. Access to materials really was a big deal here in New Hampshire. Anybody who's ever hiked in New Hampshire, you know that there are tons of old railroad tracks out in the woods, and a lot of the trails, like going into Zealand Falls Hut, for example, you're hiking along an old railroad track. And why were there railroads there? Well, there were railroads there so that we could extract trees from our forests and ship them in for the building of ship them into major cities like Manchester and Concord for the production of for building ships, for building homes, for building whatever. Our major export was lumber. And so railroads and then improved railroads helped with that. Railroads also improved communication. They standardized time to make sure that railroads, and Lincoln promoted the standardization of time during the Civil War, but they standardized time so that everybody would know when certain trains were leaving, and then Congress later adopted the standardized time used on railroads as sort of the standardized time for the country. So what I'd like you to do is tomorrow, bring to class your answer to this question. Did all of these changes help or harm America? What do you think? We've learned sort of about the big causes of the revolution. And so did this help or harm America? Take a position and give some evidence to support that position.